I think we've done a really good job of equipping chaperones, not shepherds. And I think there's a really big difference.
Yeah. Wow. My experience is that small groups are the vehicle for discipleship. However, what if they haven't been discipling students the way that we think that they are?
You know better than anyone else that culture is changing.
Youth ministry is complicated,
and doing it by yourself is really challenging. So
let's rethink it together. Sound like a game day.
welcome to the Rethinking Youth Ministry Podcast.
That was exactly like I imagined. Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Rethinking Youth Ministry Podcast. My name is Ashley, and I am so excited that today we're going to be talking about rethinking how we pass on faith to the next generation. But before we jump into this topic I'm very passionate about, I need you to meet the dream team that we have in the room today to have this conversation. So I'm throwing it to my right to Dr. DJ Coleman.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Hey, my name is DJ Coleman, and I am a doctor. I'm a professor at Indiana Wesleyan University. But before that, I was a youth pastor in Gwinnett County, Georgia, right outside of Atlanta, and just had a great time. Love youth ministry. From there, moved to Fort Worth, Texas. Was a youth pastor for about 3 years. This is a 2020 time, so kind of try to forget a lot. But I had a great time. God did some amazing things, and moved recently to Marion, Indiana, where I'm a professor at Indiana Wesleyan University.
And what are you a professor of?
Practical theology. So good. Evangelism, discipleship, youth ministry, lots of good stuff.
This is why we have you on this episode.
Yeah, well, hopefully.
You're going to bring the fire.
Hopefully.
All right, Jess Berryhill in the house.
What's up? So my name's Jess Berryhill, and I am actually from Indiana, but I appreciate it.
Let's go.
Go Hoosiers, I guess. And I have been in youth ministry for 13 years at the same church, and also do special needs ministry. So that was not on the radar, but that was where we landed. So,
And if you're not following some of the things that Jess Berryhill is doing in that space, like the intersection of youth ministry and special needs, you need to be, because she's blazing trails. There are not enough resources out there. We were just talking about this. Yeah. So I'm so excited to have your voice in this conversation. And you also are bivocational.
Yes. I have 2 jobs.
Yes.
Maybe awesome. A few more.
Which I think is a really important aspect and viewpoint in this conversation is how do you pass on faith to the next generation when you have multiple jobs that you're juggling, because it requires more time.
It does,
and you don't have a lot of that.
It makes it complicated, but it's good.
It does. Well, thanks for being here. All right.
Hey, my name is Shane Sanchez. I'm part of the Orange Students team. I'm also a professor of impractical theology. It's no good for anything, but it's a thing. We can talk about it. No, I'm not. I wish I was. Hey, what am I? What do? I do a few things. I've been involved in youth ministry for about 15 years, both as a youth pastor and now as a part of the Orange Students team. Was a youth pastor out in Arizona, youth pastor in Georgia, also in Gwinnett County, which is a giant county.
Yes, it is.
And now I'm the director of high school content on one of our curriculum teams here at Orange.
And he's also the author of the brand new best-selling book, How to See God. Thank you very much.
Yep, professor of impractical theology.
So funny
we got
about
practical
that.
here, though. Okay,
We did.
We
so
tried to. And I'm really excited for this conversation. It is so important. I know internally here at Orange, we've been having a lot of conversation around passing faith to the next generation, because it's kind of what we do and talk about. But I'm excited to hear y'all's perspective too.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like there's nothing we've talked about more in the last 3 years than this very topic.
Yeah.
Like over the last 3 years, every single one of us in this conversation, including those of you listening and watching, we've asked ourselves, how do we make sure our teenagers that we have been entrusted with have a faith of their own, have an authentic faith, have an everyday faith when our program can't meet, because we were all challenged in the last 3 years with that, right? But I mean, it was a problem long before that. Like when somebody has a job and they have to work and they can't make it to youth group, or they have a tournament, or they go back and forth between their grandparents and their mom's house, you know? And I feel like it's been a problem that we've had to navigate and figure out how we can make sure we're reaching the next generation. But I feel like I'm so passionate about this because I think you all know it matters, because if they don't have a personal faith when they're with us, they're not going to have one when they leave us.
Yeah.
And I think this conversation matters so much. And I know I've been challenged in a lot of areas, a lot of things that I've been rethinking, but I'm curious what you're rethinking when it comes to the topic of passing on faith to the next generation. I'm going to throw this to you, Jess, because I want to hear what your brilliant brain has been thinking through.
Yeah. Well, I think two things that I've been kind of seeing play out and kind of wanting to be a part of. One is empowering students to do important things. I mean, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they're going to be infinitely more active in the political scene, in the local community, than maybe even what my generation was as a millennial. And so how do we captivate that, but also tie it to faith in a way that empowers them to do big things? And I think community is going to be a big part of that. How do we begin to have a conversation about community and think about, like, what does our community actually need? I think early on in ministry, I felt like I was just programming because that's what you did. Yeah, right. Instead of just asking, like, what do people in my community actually need? Like, and how do we tie that to faith? And so I think it's that kind of intersection, like, what does that look like? And how do we do that? And it reminds me of a conversation that I had with one of my students. We were hiking on a trail on a backpacking trip recently. And she said, these trips teach me that essentially not like, it's not that I don't believe that I can do anything. It's that I believe I can do everything. And she's like, that's my problem. And I was like, actually, that's not a problem. I love that. Like, that's so good. Like, we want to empower them to do big things.
Man, that's good.
Really, really good. I want to come back to that. I have lots of questions.
Yeah, same.
I want to hear what you're experiencing with, because I know some of it and it's super innovative, and I can't wait to unpack that. DJ, what about you?
Yeah, no, this is a very important question. I think, as a professor, I'm getting students and preparing and training students that are going to do ministry in the years 2040, 2050, 2060. So what about my faith? What about my experiences? What about kind of the strategies that we know about, the methods are going to be relevant for 2040, 2050? And we don't know what that looks like.
We're guessing here.
Exactly, very much so. We have no clue what that looks like. But how do we begin to ask questions, the right questions, to think about a faith that is relevant in the years to come? I think that's so good. That's going to be crucial. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So it's not just passing the faith on, but it's the faith that is going to last in the years that are to come. Thinking about that.
Talking about 2060. Oh my gosh. Like, wow, that's good. All right, Shane, what about you?
Whew, I'm rethinking everything now with what Jess said. I don't know, what you said stuck out to me so much. That idea of what do people in our community need actually, and how that ties to the next generation's passion for faith and where they'll carry on. I think we need to talk about that more, because that was so good and also so convicting. That's a tangent, but I think that's really important. I would say personally, I think the system has been broken, and I think grappling with that and being honest about it when it comes to really what we're talking about in so many words, and it's parsed out and people have different opinions. We're talking about discipleship, like true discipleship. And if I'm honest, the systems that I've been a part of, the systems that I've built, the systems that, I really thought were designed to get a specific result, weren't getting that result for a generation. And now I think we have some data to back that up. I think we're seeing it in trends with Gen Z and Gen Alpha. And I'm going, gosh, okay, if it wasn't getting the results that we wanted, maybe it's time to rethink how we do it. So it's really just been pushing me to that place personally.
Okay, take that a step further. Unpack that a little bit more. Like, when you talk about some of the... Yes. We're going to come back to Jess and Dr. DJ here in just a moment. But while we're on this, unpack some of the data you're referencing and like, what have we been trying that's not working in your opinion?
Yeah. Wow. How much time we got? In my professorial experience, which is zero, but I just want to say it. My hope is that by the end of this conversation, people are confused and think I'm a professor. So,
I believe everything Shane tells me, so it's one of my faults.
It's true. No, that's such a good question. I think some of the data that backs it up. Look, for a long time, we've measured attendance as the key thing. I think we're recognizing now that it is not at all necessarily a indicator of health in a ministry.
Sure.
However, if we even just look at that thing that we've held on to for so long, we see that it's declining. It was declining with those of us that are millennials, and it's been declining rapidly for Gen Z. So you see a generation that's disengaging with the church. Okay, if they're disengaging with the church and the programs that we put in place for discipleship are, for the most part, connected to the local church, then that means there's a significant discipleship gap with the generation. But the other thing I would say, and I've really had to grapple with, is the way that we do community within the local church. In my experience is that small groups are the vehicle for discipleship. I still 1000% believe that that is true. However, what if they haven't been discipling students the way that we think that they are? What if we haven't taken the time to really stop and
felt like a gut
assess
punch.
that? I know it's hard. That's where I'm like, are we sure we want it? But I think part of this is my personality, but I want to grapple with the reality of the situation. I don't want to hide from the facts, and I want to know, like, is what we're doing working? I'm not saying that we have to throw it all away. That's not it at all. Community relationships are still the place for discipleship and where faith is passed down to the next generation. But are the systems that we've built to maintain that vehicle or to try to perfect that vehicle, have they actually facilitated the type of discipleship that we've been aiming for? I would say, I wouldn't say collectively across the board for everybody the answer is no, but I would say more oftentimes than not, I'm not sure that it is. But I don't know. What do y'all think?
What do you guys think about that?
I want to ask a question. I mean, do you think you feel like we've put all of our eggs in one basket with small groups?
1000%.
I think so.
No, I love what you're bringing up, because I think, yes, with the small groups, another thing also with the attendance in numbers and what are we actually measuring. So I don't think numbers are necessarily bad or wrong. I think rethinking the way that we talk about numbers. So instead of saying we have, let's say, 40 people in our student ministry, we could think, hey, we have 4 students that feel confident in prayer and they are ready to pray for students. We want to move from 4 to 7 students that have these competencies or these skills that they could pray for other students. We want to move from 7 students to 10 students by next spring who are talking about where they're seeing God at work in their schools. They're praying with people. They know the biblical meta narrative. Maybe they're going through a how to read the Bible class that we're offering. And so thinking about those types of measures, I think, is very important. One of the things that I often talk about is like a gym membership. And if you think about, let's say I went to a gym and I did everything a trainer told me to do. I lift weights, I ate the right things. I even had a personal trainer. They knew me, and I went for 3 years and saw no results for 3 years. You would say, I got cheated. This was a scam. But how often does that happen in the church? Because there are no measures. There is nothing that we're trying to measure as far as prayer, biblical literacy, spiritual formation and maturity. How do we measure these things? And so I think that becomes incredibly important, these numbers.
I was going to say, so what you're saying, Shane, is the strategy that we are approaching it with, like, are we having the results we think we're having with discipleship? And what you're saying, DJ, is, are we even measuring the right thing? So
we're not measuring. We're not measuring it.
It's the right things. I think that's the clarity that's necessary there. And I would even say, like, in my experience, the reason why I say, it's not working is not because of just what I'm seeing, in a larger narrative, across the country or the world right now. Some of that is, it's anecdotal. Like as a youth pastor, I had to grapple with that when I'm watching students who our ministry has invested in and they've been a part of, and they haven't formed faith in the way that I would have expected to, given the systems that we created for them. That's not on them. I look at myself as a leader and go, if something isn't working, then we should probably change it. Like what we're doing is too important. So I think it's a really important thing to at least grapple with right now, but I'm not saying that we have what the future is figured out by any means.
It's making me think, Jess, I'm going to throw this to you in just a second, but it's making me think like, but do we change it before we know how to measure it? Because then if we still aren't measuring the correct thing, we can change it and think the next thing's not working.
Right.
Go for it.
So I wonder, there's quantitative data like attendance and those, but are we asking the qualitative data, which is the, what are people actually feeling? Like, what are our students feeling? Like, what are their ideas? I just wonder if we've been focused on numbers, but we haven't been focused on like just actually asking the question to the people who matter.
Yeah.
I don't think it's that deep, but
Jess, I do want to come back to what you just said because it reminds me of something. But Ashley, to the question that you just asked, I think the answer is yes. Like we do need to start making changes even before we have those metrics. Some of those metrics will emerge from that. But the reason why I say yes is because we already know what it takes because it's been done for us. Like if we're sitting in leadership in a church position, I'm not saying that we were in the ideal discipleship situation, but we know the things that have helped us form our own faith.
Yeah.
Sure.
So one, we can model that, but two, those become indicators for what we look to and how we help the next generation build a faith of their own. So I think that's important, but I also think what you just said is important too, which is let's ask students. It goes to the question you said up front, which is you were talking about the community needs,
right?
But you said, what do people in your community need really? And that really qualifier is so important. I would love to hear you talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I just think sometimes we, shoot a shot and then it falls flat and we just like, okay, like it's
just say, don't shoot your shot, okay? Don't know.
It's the wrong shot. That's what she's saying.
Yeah. No, but
it's so true too. Yeah.
I mean, I think we, you look at programming and we probably all had things that just tanked and just didn't work. But what if instead we led with questioning our community and asking, hey, where are the gaps? Like, where are the gaps in our community? And then looking at the assets that your church has, and I'm not talking financial assets. I'm talking about, do we have a field that someone could use? Do we have a gym? Like, what are our things that we have? Like, what are our strengths? And what do we bring to the table? And then how do we merge the need and the assets together so that we can, maybe it looks backwards. I don't know. Maybe it's like community first and then faith follows. And so maybe that's it. Like maybe, I don't know, maybe it doesn't have to be faith first. Some people would probably cringe at that a little bit, but community can happen before faith.
Wow.
Whew. So, okay, in your experience, Jess, what have been the best ways that you found to figure out the needs of your community?
I just made a list and I went to all these people and I said, hey, can I have a conversation with you about the gaps in our community? And specifically,
Wait, you made a list of like people or
people, organizations.
Okay. So
we hit up like people who were stakeholders. So we talked to the mayor, we talked to, parents, we just made a big list. And the really cool thing was like we ended up with more friends than we had to begin with.
Wow.
And we learned what the needs were. And in that specific instance, it was about special needs ministry and like what are the needs in that specific community. But we did learn a lot of the needs in our own, like broader than that too. And so then we thought, okay, then you can use that to vision cast and then begin to maybe hit some things that people actually need that will allow you to have faith conversations later. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you're saying allow the needs in the community to frame the faith conversations rather than have the faith conversations and hope that they fill gaps in the community.
Yeah.
It's a really challenging way to think about it. I love it.
It is. And I think you can apply that same concept to what we're talking about with passing faith in the next generation within our youth ministries. Yeah. Like what if we took the time to talk to teenagers in our ministry that way?
And
like,
what if they're outside of our ministry?
And outside of our ministry, absolutely. I'm just thinking like the amount of time that we spend as adults talking about ministry to teenagers and strategy behind that, which we should do. But what you just said caused me to stop and think, how much time are we spending talking to teenagers about what their needs are? Like, and how we either are or are not filling those needs when it comes to discipleship and passing faith to them. That could change so much.
Yeah. I want to add, or maybe think about the needs of the community. I think that's huge. And So the needs of the community, but also the potential that the community already has. Like, so the blessings that are in the community and partnering with some things that are already going on in the ministry. So I always say, like, the context you're in determines the ministry that you do, but also the people that you're with and the people, determine the ministry that you do, and the people that you're ministering also. I mean, so all of this context matters. So I'll say this. I remember talking to a principal about the needs that they had at their school. One of the needs was they wanted everyone to have an iPad. We couldn't do, you can't, we can't get an iPad for everybody. Or, they say, oh, well, we want mentors. We want mentors. And that's great, but we wanted a little something more than that. And so I began to think through asking the question, what is your dream for your school? And starting there, what's the dream that you have for the school? Which is getting at, what are the needs? What are the needs? What's the vision that you have for this school? And then your dream, or the dream that your church has, and the dream that the school has, or whatever it may be, the chief of police, the mayor, the vision that they have. How do you partner in that way? So what does it look like to partner with the community? Maybe, I don't know, maybe that's going a little too far away from passing faith on to the next generation. But I do think if we are passing faith on to the next generation, they're going to want to do some sort of work. This is a generation that wants to do. So
that's what it sounds like to me. It sounds like what we're saying is, if yes, we want to pass on the faith to the next generation, but what if we passed on a better community to the next generation? What if we passed a better city to the next generation? What if we passed a better world to the next generation? I feel like, Jess, what you're saying is, if we do that, that may be the gate to faith. If we start there.
Let's talk about the why. For anyone listening who's not tracking, connect how, what that has to do with passing on faith to the next generation.
I mean, I think it's about empowering students to see that God is in their world. And sometimes you have to show up in community and, I don't know, present opportunities for them to be a part of that, even if they don't believe in Jesus yet.
I love that. Something we talk about a lot here at Orange is passing on an everyday faith, a faith that goes with them everywhere, into everything, that's for everyone. And what does it look like? And I think the community piece and the real needs of a family or a kid or a community, I mean, when you acknowledge needs, which is what Jesus often did when we read about Jesus, is acknowledge the need and show up in the need. That's really good.
That's good.
I think the best way I could summarize this from personal experience, and I'm hesitant to even say it, but I think it's true. I think the best way I could summarize it is, if I look back on the years of ministry or certain contexts in which I did ministry, we did some things really, really well. But what did we best prepare our students for? That's the question that I have to grapple with, and I feel some conviction around, because there are moments where I feel like, with all these sick events and themed everything, and we crushed it, and they were amazing. But I remember having a conversation with my wife at one point, and I can't remember if she said it or I said it, but we had this moment of are we better preparing these students to rush for their sorority than we are to invest in their community? And that's a hard thing to grapple with. But I was like, oh yeah, maybe. We kind of crushed some stuff, and I'm that is so, all of that is good. I'm all for that. I'm saying yes, but I think what I would do differently now in 2023, in this current state of our world, is put as much, if not more, emphasis on what it looks like to meet the real needs of the community, of the people around us, because I think that's what's going to cause faith to stick. When they see, wait, it's bigger than an event, it's bigger than a Sunday to Sunday thing. This impacts all of my life, and I impact the lives of other people because I'm a follower of Jesus. That's really difficult to walk away from once you become an adult.
Man, I love that, because if the starting place is God is the first missionary. God is moving in this world to redeem this world, to reconcile his world. He does that through his church, through his people. And so if God is the first missionary, the faith that we have as God's people is a missionary faith. It is a faith that is concerned about joining God and partnering with God in the work that he is doing in the world. And so one of the values of the student ministry that I was leading was going after God. And part of it is pursuing God, but part of it is God has gone before us and we're going after God. Where we are going, whether it's the schools, community, whatever it is, God is already there, working. And so we're partnering with God. Yeah. But that is the faith that these students crave for it. And I dare say that's the only faith that we have. We see that modeled in the ministry of Paul, and we see that in what Jesus called his disciples to.
Yeah, it's so good.
So what would you all say in response to someone who might say, okay, I understand meeting the needs of the community is important, acknowledging all of that, but like, when do you tell them truth?
Yeah.
Like, how do you pass on the truth of Scripture and the truth that we stand on, whether that's in doctrine or what? Like, where does that enter the picture, and how do you pass that on to the next generation?
I think we're all going to have some really good responses, but the first thing that comes to my mind is that is truth. That is the narrative that we're inviting them to. Ooh. If you think about creation, fall, Israel, church, or Jesus, church, new creation, that is the biblical meta-narrative that we are invited into.
Wow. Yeah,
Jesus comes to the Sea of Galilee. He calls people to follow him in this work. So I think it's the truth, introducing them to the truth is doing the will of my Father. People are hungry because they're not doing the will of my Father, that reconciliation, that redemption. And I mean, that's coming from Scripture, right? When Jesus says, I have food you know not of. My food is to do the will of my Father. And so I think the truth is that God is inviting us and calling us to be a part of his kingdom on this earth.
Wow. Yeah,
so
that's good.
So, but I think there's more to it, though. I would be curious, because that's such a good question.
I hear it a lot. That's why I was curious what y'all would say.
Yeah.
I mean, I think reaching out to the community in this way and putting it community first is challenging to me. And I think when you realize that, like, and you're with it, like you're in it with your students, like you're doing the things, you're doing the hard things.
Yeah. Like
it's the conversations with, one of my teenagers, one of my middle schoolers who says, well, why did that other student do something different? And we get to have a conversation about how maybe autism shows up in their life, as part of their story. But that God is still, they're still made in the image of God. So it's when you're doing it, when you're walking alongside your students, those conversations happen. Like, we don't need to beat it. Yeah. I mean, I think they naturally happen when you're doing it with your kids and with your students.
Yeah.
That's good.
So good. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I think it feels like what we're saying, and I would agree to this, is that the gathering, the teaching of Scripture, the small group conversations don't need to go away. However, if those things are happening without action taking place outside of them, then we're missing the point. Right. Like we truly are. And I think that's really the piece that needs to be rethought and reworked. It's like, what could it look like for us to go, these things are important, we're still going to teach the Scriptures, they still need to have conversations, like that is absolutely key. But if that's it, if we're leaving it there and expecting that to get us the results of true spiritual formation and discipleship, it's probably not going to be enough. I mean, that's what we've seen over the last couple of decades at least. And if we're not getting the results, again, maybe we need to make some adjustments. And I mean, what everybody's saying is connected to truly living out what it means to be a follower of Jesus, to changing your everyday actions. And again, I think that's something really hard to walk away from once you've experienced it.
I agree with that. All right, DJ, I'm coming back to you, friend. Yeah. Something you said you have been rethinking as you're navigating questions and preparing students for, ministry leadership in 2040, 2060. Yeah. Unpack that a little bit for
theology.
us. Yes, practical theology. Take us on that journey with you.
Yeah, no, I think, there's this phrase, the church is always in need of reform. We're always needing to rethink our models and our strategies, and we have to know the world that we're in. We need to know the questions that people are asking, and we have to have a missionary mindset. And I think one of the things that we've seen in the last 20 years is this a deep understanding of context. We need to know the context that we're in. And that was kind of the question, especially, with a postmodern society, a secular world that we live in. We need to know our context. What I think may have happened is a lack of biblical awareness. So we have students, I have students that are committed to their faith. They want to be leading the church, but they don't know the Bible. So they know the context and they can relate well to their world, and they have a deep desire. And these are godly people. But to remember Scripture is going to be very important. Like we don't know what 2040, 2050, 2060, we don't know what next week is going to look like, right? But I think if we ground ourselves in Scripture and we're asking the right questions about the people that we encounter, I think we can be better prepared for the future that we're going to walk into. But yeah, grounding ourselves in Scripture and asking the right questions. So yeah.
What are the right questions?
Yeah, I think so. Missionary questions would be: who are the people, right? What are their dreams or their passions, their desires? What's our? So if you think about it like a triangle, this is coming from an author. I think his name is Dave Rhodes and Will Mancini, Church Unique, and he talks about collective potential. That's what we have. Local predicament, the problems in the community, and then apostolic esprit, and that kind of gets at passion. So the easier way of saying it would be the problems in the community, the passion that we have, and the potential that we have. And so the questions then, I think, go around those three areas, or the three angles of the three sides of the triangle. So the people that we're around, asking the questions, who are they? I think would be that kind of question. Who are we? And then what is God doing? I think those kind of three questions that we're constantly kind of going around asking those three questions is
That's really good.
Very important. Yeah.
I'm curious. I have a question for you too. So when you talk about the Bible in the context of the conversation that we're having, I feel like you're not just saying knowing more of the Bible.
Sure.
Because I feel like for a generation within the church, in certain models of the church, that was a priority. It's like, how much Bible can you know? I was a part of a Bible quiz team, just maybe an all-star.
Captain?
Maybe I might have been an all-star.
You look like the captain.
20-pointer. That was my role. Just get the buzzer right. This is unbelievable. Anyways, I don't think that's what you're saying, though.
Right.
So
no, you're good.
Would you just expand on that a little bit?
No, that's good. So let's think about John chapter 3 with Nicodemus, right? So Jesus has this incredible conversation with Nicodemus. You have to be born again. We know John 3:16, God so loved the world, gave his one and only son. Whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. Incredible conversation, beautiful. And then you get to John chapter 4, and he encounters this Samaritan woman.
Yeah.
Well, he doesn't tell her about the need to be born again. Why not? He just had an incredible conversation with this academic. Why doesn't he do that again?
Yeah.
Well, this is a different person with different questions, right? There's a different question that he's thinking through. She's Samaritan, right? Jews and Samaritans don't associate. So he begins to talk about living water, which is language that comes from the Mir Markah, the book of the Samaritans. This idea of living water is very contextual to who she is. But he not only knows her or her story, he knows his story, the Jewish story, God's story. And so I think both those things are important. So knowing the Bible, I guess what I'm saying is knowing the Bible, knowing the narrative that you're inviting people into, and knowing them. So sometimes you have people that know them, they know the Samaritan, they know the questions that they're asking, they can relate to the Samaritan, but they don't know the narrative. They can't invite them into what God is doing in the world. So yeah, it's not just knowing scripture and references, it's knowing this biblical narrative, what God is doing, yes, having the vocabulary of Scripture, but it's being able to invite them into that narrative.
Yeah. Gosh, I wonder if that's why so many of us and so many, youth pastors across the country that I get to talk to, whether like I'm there visiting, speaking, or at a conference for us or whatever else, what I'm hearing is it sounds like we know this part of the Bible,
right,
but this generation is so different. And maybe we're not speaking the same language. Maybe we're on completely different planes, trying to have a conversation, but it's not resonating. And it sounds like what you're talking about. It sounds like maybe we're trying to talk to Nicodemus when we need to be having a conversation with the Samaritan woman.
And that's the beauty of what Jess is talking about, right? Yeah. We need to go to them and have those conversations, right?
Yeah,
we have to ask, what are the things that we need in this community? What is God doing in this community? Yeah. Or even if they're not Christian, not what God is doing in the community, but what's happening here.
Wow.
And so you have to know that story, but we also have to know the biblical meta narrative, and we have to know how we can invite people into that story.
Wow.
So what does this look like in terms of, like, I'm guessing there are people listening who are like, okay, I get it. Turn the volume up on service and meeting the needs in the community and come alongside them. Okay, I can do that. But I'm still required to have programming.
Yeah.
I'm still required. So how does that trickle into our programming? How does it trickle into, like, how do we motivate students to learn the narrative? Like, how, like, what does it actually look like? Or what could it look like?
Yeah.
One of the things I've said, I'm sure, Ashley, you've heard me say this. I think we need to commit to less monologue and more dialogue. We, including myself in this, when I say we, a lot of our programmatic elements are monologue. They're driven from a stage. They are what is said there, what happens there, what's sang from that position. But I wonder what it would look like for us to I'm not saying we shouldn't preach. I love to preach, still do it all the time, like all of that. I just want to make sure we're giving as much emphasis and care to the dialogue portion of what we do, which maybe it's programmatic, but it could be bigger than just the small group time. It's having great questions, great follow-up conversations that hopefully small group leaders are having throughout the week. Just more dialogue in general, which I think goes to Jess, what you were saying as well.
Yeah. So I think part of it is being really intentional about who we partner with, and how does that drive the vision for this community. If we're really thinking about community and that being a part of what we do, I think you think about partners, but I also think that there's an incredible opportunity to lead up in the church when we do this. Imagine if our student ministries decided to do this, like, we're all in. Like, I think it would challenge the church in a way that maybe we aren't challenging the church, the greater church, the bigger church. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No, I think it's huge. And I love what you said previously about, like, being with the students and some of those faith questions and faith conversations happen. One of my favorite moments in ministry, I was at church in our youth room, and a student called me coach. He knew me as coach, a character coach, not as a pastor, because he knew me from the context of football and going to his football practice. That's how he knew me. So I think if we are there, present with students, the question is, like, how do we do this? I think we're first and foremost present with where students are at. If we go to their orchestra concert, if we go to their art showcase, their gymnastics performance, if we go to those places and we're listening and we're there and we're very present, and we begin to notice where God is at work, even in those places, some of the conversations that you may have, not with your student, but another student who just happens to be there, and you're asking them about life. And then you begin to ask the other student that you do know, that's a part of your student ministry, hey, I should probably give names so we could keep track of this, but hey, your friend or your teammate was talking about just this overwhelming amount of stress. And I know that you care about people so well. Just by the way, I've observed you in your student ministry. What do you think they need to hear? What's the good news for this person? Wow. And I don't really know them. I talk to them, but I think you have a good word for them. So setting them up for success, kind of showing them that opportunity, I think that's part of the way that we invite them into the narrative, is being there with them and giving them an opportunity. They have the language. Yeah. We have to trust the Holy Spirit. We have to trust what God is doing in our ministry, that they are prepared for that moment. and let them have that moment. Not try to take that moment. Let them have that moment.
Yeah. And almost let that then determine or guide your programming.
Yeah.
Because like you're saying, Ash, like those things are still going to be in play. And I know leaders are thinking about that, right now is, okay, what does that mean? I still need to gather and do all that, which absolutely, I think maybe the shift is a mindset shift to go, if you have all of your eggs in one basket, which I have no idea what that means, but we'll just roll with it. Okay. I didn't grow up around eggs or farms. I eat eggs. Anyways, I lost it. If you put all your eggs in one basket, and that is your programming week to week, then there's probably going to be a huge gap when it comes to spiritual formation and truly handing faith to the next generation. Again, that's not something that I want anybody to feel beat up over or completely torn down. I'm talking to myself here. This is realization that I've had over the past few years where I've had to grapple with this and go, gosh, I got really, really good. And our teams got really, really good at doing the Sunday to Sunday thing. But that's not everything. And to admit that and to acknowledge it, I think is the first step.
I agree.
To grapple with it and go, okay, if it's not, then what?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that it's not important to gather and have those moments, but they take on a different purpose within the overall strategy of spiritual formation, which in turn will impact handing it to the next generation.
Yeah.
I keep sitting here thinking, like, another hard thing that I think is going to be difficult for all of us to admit, because none of us want to admit this. But when we think about our volunteers and we think about their role in passing faith to the next generation, like, I think we've done a really good job of equipping chaperones, not shepherds. And I think there's a really big difference
Wow.
between who we recruit for those roles. A chaperone and a shepherd, I mean, it feels like that's the theme I keep hearing in everything everybody's saying.
Sure. Yeah.
So let's unpack that a little bit. Like, what is the difference between a volunteer who is trained and empowered, and the vision cast for them is a chaperone role, even if you don't call it that, whatever you call it. But that's really what you mean. It's who shows up for your programming, who's in the building, who's at the event that you planned. It's who's going to show up and do the thing you told them to do.
Wow.
And what's the opposite of that?
I would say that volunteers saved the system of discipleship in the ministries that I've been a part of and have led. As I'm talking about the system and I'm going, I don't know if it's getting the results we wanted, I would say there were really great results. There was really great discipleship taking place because there was shepherding taking place. And our team, and we had a team of volunteer coaches who led volunteer small group leaders. I think because we worked really hard to build in structures of both finding the right people, but then also helping the leaders that we had develop in their own faith journeys, that saved it. So systemically, we maybe didn't have the system that would get the results ideally we would maybe want, but the people made all the difference. So I would say, like, there's a huge difference. And for us, it was raising the bar of what's required for a volunteer. It was asking really good, but also really direct and honest questions when we were interviewing volunteers. But then it was consistently checking in with volunteers to go, hey, how are you investing in the lives of students, not just on Sundays, but throughout the week? How are you do you know their name? Do you know, there's a resource that we have here at Orange called It's Personal. And there's questions within that. And that is such a great framework to go to your volunteers and go, do you know these things? Where your students live, what their name is, what's going on in their life, their family dynamic, all of those things. And I think the more emphasis you put on that, it's really interesting that it impacts the faith conversations that take place, because again, that is more of a shepherd's role. So I'm not saying we did it perfectly, but I will say that even though I can sit here and talk about systems that need to change, which I agree with, if you have the right people, they can take you much, much further than any program or anything else that you have.
Yeah, I was in my experience, I've had a lot of really amazing shepherds. Yeah. And a lot of times, now that I'm thinking about this, some of the chaperones that I've had have been a result of me thinking that I can do ministry without
Wow.
I just need bodies there.
Yeah.
And I can do it on my own. I mean, it's a misconception. Like when we read Paul, and I say Paul, I think about like the last chapter of Romans, there's a list of names there of people people that were helping him in his ministry, not just his ministry, but this huge ministry that was going on. His name is on there. But there's a ton of people. So I think if we could be honest, at least for myself, I think a chaperone oftentimes is a result of us thinking that we can do it by ourselves.
So true.
For me.
Same.
Yeah. Which is not true. It's so incorrect.
Or is it evidence that we're not shepherding our volunteers and trickling it down to the students?
My mentor always says you cultivate what you celebrate. And you reproduce what you are. And I mean, there's a lot of truth. I think it's true. I don't think we're imprisoned to that. I think God is bigger than us. But oftentimes that happens. And so, I think if I'm not shepherding, then why should I expect my leaders to shepherd? Or my students, for that matter.
So true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think modeling is huge on that. Absolutely. And I think, when you think about recruiting people, you can recruit a chaperone all day, and you have the opportunity to disciple them. And I think it's taking ownership of that and really showing up and saying, creating kind of a huddle or a crew that you can hang with, and they feel known in that space, just like we want our students to feel known, and we compel them to do big things that we're doing with our students, like continue to kind of build on. You model that in a way that is just really effective. I haven't always gotten that right, but it has been, I think we've seen chaperones turn to shepherds, and I don't think that's such a far leap. And it's, gosh, isn't it a beautiful moment when that switch flips and you're like, yes, you got it, let's go.
It changes everything.
And what possesses a person to want to serve in student ministry, right? Other than the Spirit of God, right?
Yeah.
I love student ministry, and people that show up, we need to believe that they love student ministry, that they want to see students grow. And so one of the things that I've been thinking through, maybe we could, I hope this isn't too far off, but it said that 20% of a ministry or 100% of the ministry is ran by 20% of people. And then it's 80% that kind of just reap the benefits of that ministry. I'm part of that 80%. If like people try to say, hey, we need someone to volunteer, we need someone to lead, I'm part of that 80% that's not going to raise my hand and say, hey, I'm here to serve. What I need is a personal invitation. And then this is when you're going to start. This is when you're going to end. This is how you're going to be measured. This is what we want you to do. So I think with shepherds, if with people that we want to be shepherds or leaders that we want to be shepherds, if we can give them a clear, this is what we're asking you to do, this is why we're asking you to do it, I think that's helpful, like a personal invitation to serve and to shepherd. I think that could be helpful. And I'm not saying that's not the reason that there's chaperones around, but that's something that we need to think through, is how are we inviting people to be shepherds?
I wonder, I've seen like job descriptions, and I wonder if it would be helpful for us to put on what we would offer that volunteer on that. Does that make sense? Like, what do we bring to the table that you're going to benefit?
What do we need?
Yes, exactly. What are the benefits of this job? Like, besides like the internal ramifications of hanging out with kids and loving Jesus, but like, is there, our little crew, we're a smaller church, has kind of become a small group in a way, and so I'm thinking through like, what would be our benefits that we would be able to offer our volunteers?
That's good.
DJ, something you said really stuck with me when you said, okay, what possesses somebody to do this? I think it is true that the personal does, but sometimes if we're honest about it, I think this is true regardless of context, the youth ministry is often the coolest place in the church. It just is. It's the coolest,
that's so
most fun place to serve and whatever. The reason why I say this as the reason why I say this as a caution is because I think if the ministry is cool, that can attract chaperones.
Sure.
And if your goal is, I need to have the coolest group of leaders,
right,
then you're most likely going to wind up with a team of chaperones versus a team of shepherds. Because I would say some of the most uncool people made the most incredible small group leaders. And I don't even mean that negatively. I'm just thinking the people that you would look at face value and go, is this person great for student ministry? You're like, nah, I don't think so. They wind up being the real shepherd because they're there for the right reasons. They're there not for status within the church. They're there not, and I'm not saying this is what people's ulterior motives are, but I mean, cultures get weird fast. And I think you find people who you may not expect wind up being the people who you really truly need in the youth ministry. So I just saw that time after time after time. And I think for our teams, the goal was never, hey, we need the coolest group that's going to, draw in the most students. Instead, it was, we need the people who are willing to walk through life alongside students and do that in a consistent way. And if you set up on the front end really great systems and processes for finding, interviewing, and really engaging those types of leaders, you wind up just being blown away by the results.
We've been talking a lot at the 30,000 foot level. Let's get practical. What piece of advice or what handlebars can you give to this conversation? Jess, I'm throwing it to you first.
Okay. I think it's finding what captivates the hearts of your students. So for us, we've become kind of the special needs church in our town. And so for us, a lot of our students are captivated by that. And it is an incredible intersection, and we get to be a part of that. And so I would challenge you to think about what's captivating your church's heart, what's captivating your student ministry's heart, and just run with it and look at the needs, but just do it. Just fill in the gaps as much as you can and see where it lands. And I don't know, we've just seen some really cool things happen because of just following where God's leading, I guess.
I love that.
That's cool.
Good. Yeah. For me, I think going back to those measures. So what are you measuring in your student ministry? So thinking through, the kind of the things that I threw out was, how many students do you have that feel confident to pray for another student? Thinking about that number, how do you measure that? Thinking through that, how many students can articulate the biblical meta-narrative? Maybe you have a how to read the Bible class, or a class where you talk through that and you get the whiteboard and you talk through the Bible. That could be a
Or how
thing.
many students are serving on a Sunday rather than showing up and sitting in a chair?
Yeah, how many students are serving? And then another number would be, where are your students at? So if they are, you have people in the band, people doing this, kind of figure out where they are, and then ask the question, are you there? Yeah.
Oh, that's
I
good.
love that.
Are you there? That's really good. My mind goes to, here at Orange, we call them before faith skills, but I think if you could boil this down to something really practical, I can't help but think about teaching the next generation to engage in spiritual disciplines is another way to talk about them. Not because it's the end all be all, not because that's the thing that is going to indicate, but I think that's a great habit to hand off to the next generation that becomes really foundational. So you've got hear from God through scripture and engaging with the Bible, like DJ, you were talking about earlier. You've got live for God, and that looks like serving. That looks like really just following the example and the way of Jesus with Jess. I feel like that's that you've been talking about. You have pray, which is engaging with God and having a conversation and being connected to God. And then you have talk, which is other people and community and talking about God with others. I'm like, gosh, if we could just emphasize these four things in the ministries we're a part of, and we could build our systems towards those things, and we could build our small group ministry programs towards those things, that is such a great foundation for everything we've been talking about in this conversation. So that excites me, and I hope we see more and more youth ministry leaders maybe moving in that direction. But I know they have great ideas too. I can't wait to hear the ideas that so many leaders
I know.
have.
I want to hear what ideas you have based on some of the things we proposed in this conversation or ways we've challenged each other. I would say also, I feel like if we're being honest, the programs that we're required to have, because, that's why we were hired. It's like the main dish of a meal. And anything that happens outside of our building or outside of our program is like these sides. It's the dessert dish. It's the hors d'oeuvre dish. And what if we switched them? Like, what if our budget, our manpower, our energy, and our passion didn't go to that main dish? It's an important dish, but what if we switched the plates? Like, what would that look like in how we train our leaders, how we partner with parents, how we reach students, how we meet the needs of the community? Like, what might that look like? And it's hard because I know that people listening are like, but what does that mean? What does that actually look like? It's like, well, you're going to have to figure that out because you know your community best. It's going to look different. Don't compare, your youth ministry in the South to your youth ministry in the Northeast. Like, they're going to be totally different.
For sure.
But I just wonder what passing faith to the next generation would look like if we made that switch on the table.
We need more potlucks. Right?
We need more potlucks.
All the dishes are important.
That.
Yeah, I'll bring the egg basket. Whatever that means.
Well, thank you guys so much for this conversation. If there's anything you've been rethinking, we would love to rethink it with you. So please reach out, DM us, and we'll talk soon.